Hi, and welcome to Feature Fridays. My name is Guy Bartram. I'm the Marketing Director of our Cloud Services Business Unit, and today I'm joined by Sashi again. Welcome back, Sashi. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Guy. Hi, everyone.
So, Sashi, today we're going to dive into some of the demo around container service extension, right? Last time we covered the presentation side of it, but now we're going to go into the nuts and bolts and actually see it.
That is correct.
Okay. So should we just do a little bit of a recap before on what we showed last time?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So last time, I think we covered what is container service extension, what are the user personas, what are the steps to what are the steps for cloud provider to bring up Kubernetes as a service, and what capabilities developers and customer users get when they have container service extension and Tanzu Kubernetes grid clusters. And today we are going to look at it from on the VMware Cloud Director in a demo environment.
Okay, and just to remind everyone then, Container Service Extension is a free plugin for Cloud Director, which allows our service providers to offer Kubernetes clusters as a service, Tanzu Kubernetes clusters as a service to their tenants, which obviously is great for application development and modernization projects.
That is correct.
Yeah, okay, cool. Should we dive into the demo?
Yes, let's get started.
Okay.
All right. So in this example, I'm going to showcase what provider administrator user persona is going to do to introduce Kubernetes as a service. As we discussed last time, container service extension is a plugin that's made to introduce Kubernetes as a service on the VCD without making many changes to underlying infrastructure. So in this example, I am showing the provider organization where I have NSXT manager, NSXT advanced load balancer configured. And I'm also going to show you where my container service extension is installed. So in this example, the CSE server is running on the provider's infrastructure, and it's connected to VMware Cloud Director. And this over here right now, I'm logged in as a provider administrator, and I have configured a few things like container service extension plugin, its configuration file, and then I have installed it as a service. So over here, we are going to look at the profiles.yaml, which defines VCD CLI, and it uses container service extension plugin. So with that, you can use VCD CLI to manage and connect to your VCD server. And over here, I have defined my container service extension service, which is going to run as a service on my container service extension server. And then over here, this portion is running as a service. So without interruption, your CSE server will be running in your provider organization. And the last one is it's going to connect to your VCD using your configuration file, which we just looked over here in the config.yaml file. So in this YAML file, you basically define what's the catalog that you are going to create to share the TKG templates. And for native Kubernetes service, you are going to provide some infrastructure specific values, like what is your network to customize your template, what is your template cookbook URL for native clusters. For TKG templates, we have a separate command called CSE template import, and that will be again uploaded to the this CSE templates on the VCD infrastructure.
So what you're showing here is the kind of the default configuration, right? The only thing we need to really specify is the CSE service to connect to VCD.
Yeah.
All right.
So these
Okay.
are all the steps we provider will configure to have these container service extension up and running and connect it to the VMware Cloud Director.
Okay, and just a quick question, Sashi, you showed NSX Advanced Load Balancer there. Is this now a mandatory requirement for CSE?
Yes, that is required because we are leveraging load balancing service to automate the service type load balancer on your Tanzu Kubernetes cluster. So whenever a customer is going to create a load balancing service for any application, it's actually going to configure it on the VMware Cloud Director using the cloud provider infrastructure plugin.
Okay, and that uses the ALB basic licensing, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So for the next one, I'll just show where we have the catalog called CSE templates that we defined in our config.yaml. And I have uploaded a few TKG templates that I downloaded from the VMware CSP, the customer service portal.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah. So for CSE version 3.12, we support TKG version 1.4.1. So these are all the relevant templates uploaded over here. Over here, I am now logged in as a provider admin again. And within my provider portal, under administration, we can do it in two places, like publishing the write bundles. First one is that we modify the default rights bundles, or we can just so maybe we can make changes to like whatever roles are required. So for example, we need a manage users API token, we need certificate library, we need a gateway services and load balancing. All those rights are required for the successful TKG cluster creation and load balancing. So we can maybe change it over here, or we can modify the global roles and or customer organization role for your customer organization. And then over here, you can just modify these. So in this example, I have made changes to the global role of my organization admin. So all the customer organizations will have these rights.
Yeah. Okay. So you can do a one or all approach.
Yeah. So it's the best practice that provider admin would have. They can follow this. All right. Yeah. So these are the steps for cloud providers to bring up the Kubernetes as a service for your customer organizations. Once these steps are completed, we can see the developer side of the story. Before I can go there, we have created this container service extension on Photon OS 3.0 version. And since Photon OS is supported by VMware, so your end-to-end solution will be supported by VMware.
Okay. Yeah. And Sashi, we've kind of rushed through some of these steps here, but all of this is kind of fully documented on our documentation site. Would that be correct?
Yeah, so we have a GitHub documentation for container service extension, which talks about different components of these steps and required rights bundles and prerequisites for container service extension. We can refer to that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And once this is done, we can navigate to the developer side of the story. So all right. So now I am logged into the tenant portal. In this organization, I have published my rights bundles. I have enabled the UI plugin, and I can see my shared catalog for the Tanzu Kubernetes clusters called CSE templates. And then at this point, I'm ready to deploy a Kubernetes cluster. So over here, we'll see a new tab called Kubernetes Containers plugin. And over there, we can see I have already created one demo cluster, and we can download the kubeconfig to access that Kubernetes cluster. But right now, we'll just look at what components we can see in the cluster. So in this cluster, I have one control plane and two worker plane VMs. And I have enabled the routed network configuration for my Kubernetes cluster. So it's actually going to allow inbound access to your TKG cluster using an external network IP. And the TKG cluster has two plugins like we discussed last time, CSI and CPI. So CSI plugin is basically responsible for providing persistent volume capabilities. So we can see few volumes being created here. And this is going to provide all the details about size of the Kubernetes cluster. And the way it looks in the customer organization is basically a VApp. And this VApp is going to have different machines, like one control plane and two worker plane VMs that we created. And we can see that they are connected through a network, which is configured by the tenant admin. And we can see that in the networking section. So this is the private SNAT network.
So this is if you wanted to provide access to your TKG cluster from another org VDC, perhaps.
So, sorry?
This is if you wanted to provide access to your TKG cluster from another org VDC.
Yes, we can also do that. Yeah. So over here, we can see all the NAT rules, and then the rule we are interested in is the next one, which will be coming in the last one. So this is the rule we are interested in, TKG Friday. So this is the cluster that we created, and we enabled the option to allow inbound access, so we can access this cluster using this external network IP.
Okay.
And then at this point, we will go to access that Kubernetes cluster. So in this example, I'm going to access this cluster using kubectl. I have already downloaded the kubeconfig file of that cluster, and then we can see the configuration or all the pods in details. So once we created the cluster, we will see out of the box these parameters. First is the Entria plugin. So Entria will be our default CNI plugin for all the control and worker plane networking. The next one is the core DNS that provides the DNS service for internal and like DNS service to resolve DNS for all the URLs. The CSI plugin is providing the persistent volume support, and this VMware Cloud Director CCM pod is actually going to provide the automated load balancing configurations.
Okay.
So,
got it.
Yeah. And the Kube API and proxy, these are all part of, so Kube API is providing the access to your Kubernetes cluster, and the proxy is what we introduced in CSE release 3.1.2. So provider can define a proxy configuration in the config.yaml we just saw earlier, and then every time a new cluster is created by a customer organization, the Kubernetes cluster will use proxy configuration for outbound traffic, and that way they can provide some connectivity in the internet restricted environment.
Okay.
And then from this point, you can basically access your Kubernetes cluster. Okay, here. So now I'll also show another way. So earlier we saw that we can create a new cluster using UI, using like these workflows, and select the templates and all the configuration values for storage and compute and things like that.
Yeah.
So over here, we don't really have to define a specific sizing policy. Now we can do custom size by defining CPU and memory also. And the next one is the storage profile, and we can select any network, and then this is the one which will allow us the inbound access. And that's how we basically create a Kubernetes cluster. And then once the cluster is created, we can see the status over here. And the other way to create your Kubernetes cluster is by defining that same values in the YAML configuration. So this is that sample YAML configuration file where you can define the TKGM cluster values. So this is the template name from your customer organization, like which Kubernetes template you want to use to create your TKG cluster, your networking pods values, the number of control and worker plane VMs, and rollback on failure will basically define if you want to keep the failed cluster or not for debugging purpose. And once you have this cluster, you can basically use the VCD CLI to just create this cluster by using the command called VCD CSE cluster apply, and then this TKG Friday.yaml file.
YAML file, yeah, got it.
So all the developers can use either ways, UI or CLI, to basically create and manage cluster. And now we will go. So do we have any questions so far?
Yeah, so when you were doing user rights before, we gave the tenant admin rights to CSE, but we didn't give the tenant user rights to CSE. Would the developers as users need access to those rights? Okay.
So you brought up a very good point. I think I forgot to mention that as a tenant admin, they can create a new user or new role that can be created based on the rights that are required for TKG cluster. So in this example, I'm just using the organization administrator user to create this cluster, but definitely org admin can create a new user with those rights to create the cluster.
So they could create a developer role with all the rights necessary and just assign that to whoever needs it.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So there's quite a lot of steps here as well, but basically, in a nutshell, there's the ability to download and instantiate the plugin via the VCD UI by just going through the plugin add wizard. Then download the TKG images you want based on the CSE version you have. And then you got the choice, well, then you have to do some configuration in the YAML file, perhaps, but also you need to make sure your CSE service is configured to connect to the VCD.
Yeah.
Once you've done that, it should be up and running. And then you come in, create the user roles like we've done here. And then it's up to either the admin or a developer to start creating clusters.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And so basically this TKG cluster we created is requires 2 more steps to so that it can be used for application deployment. Number 1 is upload a certificate to the certificate library. And number 2 is create a storage class on the TKG cluster. So
yeah, it was in the CSC drop down, I think.
Yeah.
Storage class. Yeah.
Yeah. So you also have to create a storage class file to define what storage profile from your VCD organization you are going to use to create persistent volumes. And you can define the reclaim policy and like, so, and what's the file system of your storage class. So these 2 values are required. And then once you have created this file, you basically need to apply it for creating the storage class. So once we apply this, we can do get storage class, and then we can see that we have created a new storage class called lab shared storage. And over here, for other applications, we can see all the persistent volumes we have already created for different applications that's deployed on our TKG cluster.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. And for the Tanzu packages, we can use the same cluster. And over here, we are going to perform 2 steps. Number 1 is we are going to install Tanzu CLI on the local machine. So in this example, I have installed Tanzu CLI already. And you also need to define a few things before you can install packages. So far we support mainly 4 or 5 packages. First one is the Prometheus, Grafana, Harbor, and the Fluent Bit. So these are the main ones, but they require a few more packages to be installed as a prerequisite. So one of them is the Contour, and the Contour is the main one. And then on the TKG cluster we have today doesn't have the KApp controller as well. So we need to create a KApp controller on this TKG cluster. So these are the two requirements before we can install Harbor or Prometheus or Grafana or Fluent Bit on our TKG cluster.
Okay.
So over here we are going to look at the Contour. So I'll just presume that we have Tanzu CLI installed already, and there is a very good documentation available on VMware site, so you can use that. So Tanzu version, and then you can check the versions, and then Tanzu list. So this will show the available packages on the Tanzu CLI. So here you can see we have a Fluent Bit, Grafana, Harbor, Prometheus, etc. And then Prometheus. So once we can see the available list of packages, we can also see we have Cert Manager, Contour, External DNS. These are the prerequisites that we need to install first. And then once we have installed these, we can do Fluent Bit and other ones.
Okay.
So in this example, to install a package, you can say Tanzu packages, package install. And then over here, you can define the namespace, the name of the packages, and then values .yaml file for each of the packages. So to do this, so first of all, we'll install the KApp controller. And then once that is done, we can install the other ones, cert managers and DNS and things like Contour.
Okay.
So to do that,
so these steps that we're doing now, or that we've already done because they're already installed, but these are things that would a service provider go through all of this first to make sure it's all kind of up and running and hand it over to a developer?
So there are multiple, it can be done either ways. Developers or tenant admin can perform these steps, or provider can install these as additional service and then provide it to their customers.
So just thinking, if it's a developer, then they're going to have to, obviously know something about Tanzu and understand which packages to install. And there's quite a lot of, it looks like there's quite a lot of intricacy here in the way things have got to be installed. And that would mean developers having to kind of really understand Tanzu, whereas they just want to understand, Kubernetes rather than Tanzu.
Yeah, so to explain further, Tanzu CLI is just a wrap. It's basically a way to, it's additional functionality that's on top of the kubectl commands. So on backend, it's using Carvel packaging, and it's more transparent in terms of package management. So that's why we are using Carvel. So knowledge of kubectl will be required because they are already using the kubectl. And this Tanzu package management is additional component that they need to learn. But as you can see, the CLI is very rich, and you can, using the different options, you can install and manage the packages. It's kind of a wrapper for around the kubectl to actually manage the packages on the TKG cluster.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, from a delivery perspective, developers want to use kubectl. They want to get into the Kubernetes side of things. The tenant admin, I suppose they could have control over this and Tanzu packages installed into the cluster, or perhaps the service provider as a managed service preps the cluster for them and then hands it over with all the packages installed correctly. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. So I guess what I want to just emphasize here is that you as a developer, we're not kind of enforcing them to understand the Tanzu wrapper in any way. It would be the tenant admin and service provider definitely need to understand this.
Yeah, that is true. And the other point is that these packages are for the admin or Kubernetes admin who is going to manage that cluster for the developers. So it's the purpose of Harbor or Grafana or Prometheus. Everyday developer developing applications are not going to consume them. It's the administrator who is monitoring these or reporting it for usage purpose for the business logic. So these are not something that developer would use daily. It's the administrator or tenant admin user persona is going to manage that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm just starting to think with the tenant admin as well, given these are all YAML files, right? They could just create their own script to just do all of these installations automatically.
Yes, that is correct. So these values are already available generally for Contour or Harbor or Prometheus or Grafana. So all these things, they can customize it for their environment and maintain it based on their requirement. And yeah, so basically, yeah, so that's that. I mean, they have to maintain it for their local environment. That's true.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right. So now that they've got all of the Tanzu package installed, like you say, for monitoring code repository and stuff like that, you'll be able to see all those deployed. And from this point on, you're really live with your cluster. You've got every package that your developers need and that you need deployed. And then it would move into a kind of a more maintenance mode, or upgrading packages when necessary, upgrading image templates when necessary.
Yeah, so the cluster upgrade is supported with cluster API. So packages are mostly tied with the TKG version of the, they are mainly tied with the TKG cluster. So right now, if you are running on, say, TKG version 1.4, you are going to have specific version of Tanzu packages tied to that. And CSE right now doesn't upgrade the workload cluster for TKG especially. So we can do that using cluster API today. So right now, we don't really need to upgrade the packages on the CSE managed TKG cluster. But if we have to upgrade the packages or uninstall or delete the packages, the standard Tanzu package management practices can be performed on these TKG clusters.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Again, that's part of the value of using the Tanzu wrapper there, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in this example, I just wanted to show you the installed applications. So in this example, we have installed, say, Prometheus and the Contour and Harbor, so, and Grafana. So we can see those being assigned some virtual IPs for each of those. And we can see, we can access these using these IPs over here. So this will open some Nginx, and 7 is going to open some Grafana's dashboard. The other thing I wanted to talk about was that each of these packages can be deployed per cluster basis, or for Harbor, it's per tenant organization. So the customers don't have to install it on each cluster. It can be shared across the organization, and they can create some rules on the Harbor to restrict usage within their organization.
Okay, because Harbor, obviously, they want to perhaps have a private repo, so they keep that to their own. When you say organization, you're talking about VCD organization, right?
VCD organization.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So the other packages would be available to anyone outside of that cluster as well?
Yeah, they can restrict the access to, like, based on how you have the access to, like, if it's publicly available URL, you can restrict the access using the authentication.
Yeah.
So you can perform that.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Well, that's really good. So what we've seen, and just to recap, we've seen the setup of CSE, deployment of the plugin, configuration of the YAML files, the configuration of the service script, then the creation of TKG cluster, deployment of packages, and deployment of Tanzu packages, the requirements around those, and the user rights and stuff like that as well. So yeah, we've pretty much covered kind of all of the bases, and I think that just leaves the cluster API, right, Sashi?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll cover that next time then.
Yeah, so next time we will look at the cluster API and see it in action, and some concepts around the cluster API.
Brilliant. Sashi, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. It's been really good to see you around CSE, and I look forward to our cluster API session.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.